Without a doubt, the Cinderella feel-good story of 2025 so far has to be the rise of the USF Bulls. Better known as the University of South Florida, USF is one of the newer college football programs in the grand scheme of things, and they've had a couple of good eras, but this might be their best team ever. So far, the Bulls have wins over 2 top 25 teams, and they have an opportunity to beat a third straight ranked team this weekend as they will face off with the Miami Hurricane. In today's video, I want to do a spotlight on how USF got to this point. I mean, a few years ago, the Bulls were in a very bad spot, and honestly were not very good, and Alex Golesh has changed everything. We're to talk about who Golesh is, how the Bulls have gotten better, and just how good they could be the rest of the season. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's go ahead and get started and talk about the impossible rise of USF football. Okay, so in order to understand how USF got to this point, we do first need to go back in time. USF is one of the newer programs in college football, as I said, as they began all the way back in 1997. They're obviously located in the city of Tampa, Florida, and the Bulls, in my opinion, have one of the best color schemes. Their first head coach was Jim Leavitt, who is sort of known for bad things now, but he came from Kansas State and was hired to be the team's first ever head coach. One of the best parts about the USF story is that their first team meeting was held under a tree. There are no proper football facilities on campus, and just now they are finally starting the process of building their own stadium. Somehow they managed to start at the FCS level, and at first it was tough sledding. The team went 5-6 in their first year, but then managed to actually get ranked in the FCS in both 1998 and 1999. Jim Leavitt would then help them move up to the FBS as they became an independent in 2001, and the Bulls went 8-3, followed by a 9-2 season in 2002. The Bulls would continue to move up, as in 2003 they would join Conference USA, and they weren't as good. They went 7-4 in 2003, then 4-7 in 2004. They were in an area with a lot of talent, they were located in a big city, and they had seen some early success, so the Big East decided to scoop them up in 2005. They are now a member of one of the power conferences, and in year 1, the team would go 6-6 and would end up making a bowl game. In 2006, the Bulls would once again explode, going 9-4 with a win in the Papa John's Bowl. Then the 2007 season happened. This was the year that changed everything for USF, as after starting the year unranked, they would go on the road and beat Auburn in week 2 and would jump into the polls. They then knocked off number 5 West Virginia and jumped all the way up to number 6 in the nation. The Bulls would continue to climb, and then were ranked as high as number 2 in the nation. There was a real shot of USF going to the national championship if they could win out, but then they lost to Rutgers, UConn, and Cincinnati, and fell out of the polls for the remainder of the regular season, before then losing to Oregon in the Sun Bowl. After at one point being number 2 in the nation, the team ended up losing 4 games. It was somewhat disappointing, but it showed that USF had plenty of potential. To close out the Jim Leavitt era, he'd have back-to-back 8-5 seasons, and he'd go out with 2 bowl victories. In 2010, the Jim Leavitt era would fall apart, as he ended up getting fired after an investigation, and he apparently struck a player. There's obviously some other stuff that he has done that I don't want to get into on the channel, but in the meantime, they would have to find a new head coach, and they went with a guy by the name of Skip Holtz. His dad was obviously Lou Holtz, and Skip had done a good job and had really built up the East Carolina football program. He had won 38 games in 5 years, and would decide to take the USF job. From 2010 to 2012, Holtz was the coach for 3 seasons. He only won 2 conference games in 2011 and 2012 combined, and he was eventually fired after going 16-21 with only 1 bowl appearance. Holtz just wasn't the guy for the job. And then in 2013, things got different. They went out and hired Willie Taggart, who started his career at Western Kentucky and had helped turn around the Hilltoppers program with back-to-back winning seasons, and it just seemed he was a good fit. Taggart would end up turning around the USF program, as after the Bulls went 2-10 in 2013, they would improve to 4-8 in 2014, before then blowing up in 2015. The team would go 6-2 in the American Athletic Conference, and then they would go 8-5 overall. Sadly, they'd lose in the Miami Beach Bowl, and the 2016 team was actually really solid. They stole a game against Syracuse early on, and they won 6 of their last 7 regular season games, going into a matchup with UCF. They'd end up winning the War on I-4 game against UCF, and then beat South Carolina. They won that game in overtime, and they actually finished the year ranked number 19 in the nation. Taggart had gone 11-2 with a 7-1 mark in the American Conference, and he would decide to jump ship for Oregon. The guy that they got next was Charlie Strong, who had been pretty much everywhere and was supposed to be the guy to turn around Texas football. Strong was actually gifted a 2017 team that was loaded with talent, as Quentin Flowers was the quarterback at the time, and he was one of the best in the nation. Then you had future NFL running back Dearness Johnson, and at the receiver spot, you had Marquez Valdez-Scantling. There was actually so much hype for the Bulls that they began the season ranked number 19 in the nation, and would string off a couple of early victories. They defeated San Jose State, Stony Brook, Illinois, Temple, East Carolina, Cincinnati, and then Tulane, before facing off with Houston. The Cougars were one of the better teams back then, and sadly USF dropped their first game of the year with a 4-point loss to them. They ended up dipping out of the polls, but would return after wins against UConn and Tulsa, and then would face off with number 13 UCF in the War on I-4 game, and this was the biggest game in the rivalry's history. It was one of the most thrilling games of the 2017 season as well, as after USF tied it late, UCF had a game-winning kickoff return touchdown, and it was absolutely electric. That was one of my favorite games from that era, and sadly USF lost, but would then beat Texas Tech in the Birmingham Bowl to finish the season at 10-2 with a number 21 ranking. USF was a legitimate program, and when it came time to conference realignment, many thought the Bulls had a substantial chance at getting a bid. Sadly, it looks like Charlie Strong was just capitalizing off of good players from the Taggart era, as he would then go 7-6 in 2018, and then 4-8 in 2019. The Blake Barnett experiment at quarterback did not end up working. Going into 2020, they'd have to make a splashy new hire, and unfortunately, they picked the wrong guy. USF decided to move forward with former Clemson coach Jeff Scott, and many thought because he was young and a good recruiter that he could really take the next step at a school like USF, but instead it was the opposite. 2020 to 2022, Jeff Scott was one of the worst head coaches in the country, as he only won a total of 4 games and only won 1 conference game. USF had now become a laughingstock in the American, and this was right at the time when the Big 12 was expanding and considering them. The rival UCF got picked up, but USF was left in the dust. The Jeff Scott era was absolutely atrocious, but in 2023, USF finally turned a new leaf, and they hired the right guy that would fix them. His name was Alex Golesh. On December 4th of 2022, USF would name Alex Golesh as their new head coach. He became the number 6 Bulls coach in USF football history, and he came by way of being Tennessee's offensive coordinator. He was also an extremely good recruiter, led one of the nation's fastest paced and most explosive offenses, and it seemed like he had a lot of potential and was just starting to scratch the surface in terms of how good of a coach he could be. He was a finalist for the Broyles Award, and while this hire was going under the radar, those who really paid attention to college football knew that Golesh was going to eventually succeed at USF. In 2023, Golesh ended up finding his quarterback in a player by the name of Byron Brown. Brown was a super underrated quarterback who came out of Raleigh, North Carolina, and he passed for over 3,700 yards and 43 touchdowns as a senior, while also rushing for nearly 1,200 yards. He's only a 3-star recruit, and honestly, I think scouts just sort of overlooked him. Brown would become the starting quarterback for the Bulls back in 2023, and he was really good. In fact, he was one of the top quarterbacks in the country, as he passed for 3,300 yards and 26 touchdowns, and also ran for 800 yards and 11 touchdowns. He became the best running back and the best passer, and they also had former Florida running back Naquan Wright, and he was really good. And then at the receiver spot, Sean Atkins led the team with 92 catches for 1,054 yards and 7 touchdowns. USF definitely had an interesting season, as they lost in Week 1 against WKU, but would get their first win of the Golesh era against Florida A&M. They were actually pretty competitive against number 10 Alabama, as that game was close well into the second half, but they ultimately lost. It still showed that this was a different USF team than it was under Jeff Scott, and then they'd rally 2 straight wins against Rice and Navy. Sadly, the middle stretch of the season was difficult for them, as they'd lose 4 of the next 6 games against UAB, FAU, Memphis, and UTSA, but they just needed one more win for bowl eligibility, and they would knock off Charlotte, and they'd get their opportunity. They'd play against Syracuse in the Boca Raton Bowl, and they'd end up winning that game 45-0. This was somewhat shocking, but USF got good by the end of the year. The Bulls had gone 7-6 with a 4-6 mark in the AAC, and first-year offensive coordinator Todd Orlando was great, and Joel Gordon at OC was also really good. Byron Brown was one of the top returning starters for the 2024 season, but sadly, 2024 would not go according to plan. The Bulls would sort of stay stagnant, as while Byron Brown was back at quarterback, he'd ultimately suffer an injury. Bryce Archie became the quarterback from there, and he just wasn't as good. He finished with 2,000 yards passing, but had more interceptions than touchdowns. Kelly Joyner and Naquan Wright became the top 2 running backs, and they actually had a really good ground game, but they just were not getting the same kind of production out of the passing game. But they did find a new weapon in Keyshawn Singleton, who becomes more important later. The team would end up beating Bethune-Cookman in week 1 before then getting killed on the road against Bama. They would then beat Southern Miss before losing to Miami, Tulane, and Memphis. USF was now 2-4, but they would flip a switch the back half of the season, winning 4 of their next 6 games, beating UAB, FAU, Charlotte, and Tulsa, before qualifying for playing in the Hawaii Bowl against San Jose State. The Bulls win the game 41-39 in 5 overtimes, and they went 7-6 with a 4-4 mark in year 2. Many thought that USF could be a sleeping giant, as they also announced plans of a new football stadium, and it seemed like a lot of money and energy was being poured into the program now. This was not the same old USF program of the Strong and Scott era. Still though, while people thought they would be good, no one thought they'd be where they are right now. To start out the season, they'd have to face off against 3 straight ranked opponents: Boise State, Florida, and Miami. Each one of them would get progressively more difficult, but for many USF fans, 9-3 was the dream. Maybe you pull one off against those 3, but probably not. In week 1, USF would play against Boise State, and that was in the Thursday slot. This game was absolutely incredible, as while it was close the first half, there was a couple of big momentum plays that really swung the game, including a fake punt touchdown. Ultimately, they would kill the Boise State Broncos 34-7 and cruise to a 1-0 record. Guys like Keyshawn Singleton and Chaz Nimrod looked incredible at the receiver spot, and Byron Brown looked like his old self. Going into week 2, they'd face off on the road against number 13 Florida, and if they could somehow pull this win off, it would truly be magical. That's exactly what they'd end up doing, as they had a late drive where they went down the field and also got aided by a couple of boneheaded Florida mistakes, and they'd kick a game-winning field goal. They now had beaten a second straight ranked team, and they beat Florida 18-16. Some could argue this is one of the biggest wins in school history for USF, but more importantly, it puts them in the driver's seat for the Group of 5 spot in the college football playoff. South Florida now has 2 good wins on their resume, and they have a chance at a third this weekend. This game for some dumb reason is broadcasted on the CW network, but USF is ranked and they will play against the Canes on the road. This is one of those early, unexpected, but awesome matchups, and we'll see if they can do it a third straight time. Honestly, I think I'm going to pick Miami to win this game close, but USF I think will give them everything they have. There's no game on the schedule that really scares me that much, as I think they'll easily beat South Carolina State, Charlotte, North Texas, Florida Atlantic, UTSA, Navy, UAB, and Rice, but that road contest against Memphis could be huge. Even if they lose against Miami, I still think they're in the driver's seat for the college football playoff if they do in fact win out and go 12-1, but teams like UNLV will be hoping for a loss, and they'll be big Memphis Tiger fans come the month of October. For now though, USF is one of the better stories, and they have a very unique history. I wanted to tell the USF story, and if you're a Bulls fan, let me know what I got right and wrong down below, how good you think the team will be, and what topic I should cover next. Also, before you go, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and check out one of the videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.